The sound wasn't loud, just a dry, crisp reep, but it silenced the entire gate area of Terminal 3 like a gunshot. 50 people froze. A mother covered her child's eyes. At the center of the storm stood Brock Henderson, a gate agent with a sneer that could curdle milk, holding 2 pieces of a blue passport. Standing opposite him was Maya Sterling. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just adjusted her glasses and smiled the terrifyingly calm smile of a predator who knows the trap has just snapped shut. Brock thought he was humiliating a helpless passenger. He had no idea he had just committed a federal felony against the highest-ranking FAA auditor in the country. And by the time he realized his mistake, it wouldn't just be his job on the line, it would be his freedom. The departure lounge for Aerolux Airways Flight 292 from Chicago O'Hare to London Heathrow was a symphony of organized chaos. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the grey Midwestern sky pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, promising delays and turbulence. Inside Terminal 3, the air smelled of stale pretzels, anxiety, and expensive duty-free perfume. Maya Sterling sat in seat 14B near the window, a half-empty cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand. To the casual observer, she looked like just another weary traveler. She was dressed in comfortable travel attire, a pair of high-quality black leggings, a cream-colored cashmere sweater that had seen better days, and a simple trench coat draped over her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a functional, no-nonsense bun, and her only luggage was a leather carry-on that looked well-worn. There was nothing about her that screamed authority. There were no badges visible, no sharp business suit, and certainly no entourage. That was the point. Maya checked her watch, a vintage Cartier tank, the only subtle hint of her actual status, and noted the time, 14:15. Boarding was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. She pulled a small, battered notebook from her purse and made a note. Gate B12. Staffing levels adequate. Queue management chaotic. Priority lane signage obstructed. She wasn't just flying to London for a vacation. Maya Sterling was the Regional Director of Compliance for the FAA's Office of Audit and Evaluation. In the world of aviation, she was the person the airlines had nightmares about. She didn't just hand out fines. She had the authority to ground fleets, revoke operating certificates, and personally dismantle the careers of negligent executives. Today, she was conducting a red team operation, a stress test of Aerolux's passenger handling and security protocols, following a series of complaints regarding discriminatory practices and safety violations. Her target wasn't the plane itself, but the gate culture. Specifically, she was watching a man named Brock Henderson. Brock was the senior gate lead for Aerolux at O'Hare. He was a man who wore his polyester uniform a size too tight, presumably to show off time spent at the gym, though it mostly just made him look uncomfortable. He had a buzz cut, a perfectly trimmed goatee, and an expression of permanent disdain. He moved behind the podium with the swagger of a nightclub bouncer, rather than a customer service representative. Maya watched as an elderly couple approached the desk. They looked confused, holding out their boarding passes with trembling hands. "We just wanted to know if we could pre-board," the old man asked softly. "My wife has bad knees." Brock didn't even look up from his computer screen. He tapped furiously on the keyboard, chewing gum with an open mouth. "Zone 1 only right now. Sit down and wait for your zone." "But sir, the sign says pre-boarding for those needing assistance is—" "And I said sit down," Brock snapped, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, devoid of empathy. "Unless you want to miss the flight entirely, I can rebook you for Thursday." The threat hung in the air. The old man shrank back, nodding apologetically to the man who was bullying him, and led his wife away. Maya's pen scratched against the paper. Agent B. Henderson. Verbal aggression. Failure to comply with ADA pre-boarding mandates. Time, 14:18. She felt a familiar heat rising in her chest. It was the specific kind of anger she reserved for bullies who mistook a little bit of bureaucratic power for godhood. But she forced herself to remain cool. The trap had to be set perfectly. 10 minutes later, the announcement came over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, Aerolux Flight 292 to London is now ready for boarding. We are inviting our first class and diamond status passengers to board at this time. Maya stood up. She wasn't flying first class today. She had booked a standard economy ticket, specifically to see how the common people were treated. However, she had also flagged her reservation in the system with a subtle SSR, Special Service Request code, that usually triggered a secondary ID check. It was bait. She wanted to see how they handled a hiccup. She joined the economy line, which was already snaking back toward the food court. Ahead of her, a young family with a crying baby was trying to collapse a stroller. Brock was at the scanner, scanning boarding passes with a rhythmic beep, 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 his eyes scanning the crowd not for security threats, but for victims. Maya watched him single out a young Asian student with a large backpack. "That's too big," Brock barked, stepping out from behind the podium to block the boy's path. "It fits in the sizer, I checked," the student said, his voice shaking slightly. Brock kicked the metal sizer measuring device. "I don't care what the metal box says. I say it's too big. Gate check it. $75. "But, do you want to fly or do you want to argue?" Brock crossed his arms, his biceps straining against the cheap fabric of his blazer. The student handed over his credit card, defeated. Maya stepped forward. It was her turn. She held her phone with the digital boarding pass in one hand and her passport in the other. She approached the podium with a polite, neutral expression. "Good afternoon," Maya said. Brock didn't respond. He snatched the passport from her hand. He didn't scan the boarding pass immediately. Instead, he opened the passport and looked at the photo. Then he looked at Maya, then back at the photo. He let out a short, derisive snort. "Problem?" Maya asked, her voice level. "This you?" Brock asked, tilting the passport so the people in line behind her could see. "Doesn't look like you." "It was taken 3 years ago," Maya said. "People change their hair." "People change hair. They don't change face shapes," Brock muttered. He held the passport up to the light, bending it slightly. "This document looks altered." Maya blinked. She had expected rudeness. She hadn't expected an accusation of forgery this early in the interaction. "I assure you, it is a valid United States passport. If you scan it, the chip will verify my biometric data." "I don't need a machine to tell me what my eyes see," Brock said, his voice raising so that the surrounding passengers began to look over. This was his stage, and he loved an audience. "You know, we've been getting a lot of fakes lately. People trying to sneak into countries they don't belong in." The racial undertone was subtle, but sharp as a razor. Maya was a black woman with dark skin. The photo in the passport was lighter due to the flash, a common issue with biometric photography. Brock was using it as a weapon. "Scan the passport, Mr. Henderson," Maya said, dropping the polite facade just an inch. She used his name intentionally. Brock's eyes narrowed. "I didn't give you my name." "It's on your badge," she pointed out, "along with your ID number, 412022 Alpha. Brock bristled. He hated it when passengers paid attention. It disrupted the power dynamic. He leaned over the podium, invading her personal space. "Listen, lady, you might think you're smart, but this is my gate, my rules, and right now, my rules say this passport is suspicious." "Suspicious how?" The laminate, Brock said, tapping the page with a thick, nail-bitten finger. It's peeling. See that corner? Maya looked. The passport was in pristine condition. There was absolutely no peeling. There is no damage to that document. I say there is. Brock smiled, a nasty, tight expression. And under FAA regulations, we cannot accept damaged travel documents. It's a security risk. That is a misinterpretation of the regulation, Maya corrected him instantly. FAA regulation, CFR deals with safety. The acceptance of travel documents is governed by the State Department and the destination country's entry requirements, specifically the Schengen Borders Code for the UK, which accepts reasonable wear and tear. Furthermore, that passport is mint. The line behind them was growing restless. "Come on, let her through!" someone shouted from the back. Brock's face turned a mottled red. He wasn't used to being quoted regulations by women in leggings. He felt his authority slipping, and for a man like Brock, that was unacceptable. He needed to reassert dominance. He needed to break her. "You think you're a lawyer or something?" Brock sneered. "Something like that," Maya replied calmly. "I am asking you to scan the document and board me. Otherwise, I will need to speak to your station manager, Linda Kravitz." The mention of the station manager's name made Brock freeze for a second. How did she know Linda? But his ego quickly overrode his caution. He decided she must have just looked it up on the app. "Linda is busy," Brock snapped, "and you aren't going anywhere." He looked down at the passport in his hands. His thumb began to work at the edge of the photo page. Maya watched his hands closely. Her heart rate spiked, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She realized what he was about to do. "Don't do it," she warned, her voice dropping an octave. "Mr. Henderson, if you damage that federal document, you are crossing a line you cannot uncross." "It's already damaged," Brock said, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm just testing the integrity." He applied pressure. "I am warning you," Maya said, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "I am a federal—" "You're a passenger in my line," Brock yelled. And then, with a violent, deliberate jerk of his wrist, he pulled. The sound of the high-security laminate tearing away from the binding was sickeningly loud in the sudden quiet of the gate area. It wasn't just a little tear. He had ripped the photo page halfway out of the booklet. The crowd gasped. A woman near the front put her hand over her mouth. Brock held up the mangled blue booklet, a triumphant smirk plastered across his face. He tossed it onto the counter between them like a piece of trash. "Whoops," Brock said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like it just came apart in my hands. Cheap government manufacturing, huh? You can't fly with that. Denied boarding." He reached for his keyboard to flag her ticket as a no-show. Maya looked down at the ruined passport. It was her official government issuance. She looked up at Brock, who was already gesturing for the next person in line, dismissing her as if she were invisible. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. Brock had welded it closed around his own neck. Maya didn't move. She didn't pick up the passport. She slowly reached into her purse, not for a tissue, but for her phone. "Next!" Brock yelled, ignoring her. "No," Maya said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "No next. You have just destroyed federal property and obstructed a federal investigation." Brock laughed. "Security. We got a disruptive passenger at B12, he shouted into his radio, looking at her with mock pity. "You want to play the hard way? Fine. Enjoy the no-fly list, honey." Maya smiled. It was the smile of the executioner. "Mr. Henderson," she said softly, "I'm not going on the no-fly list, but you are about to become very famous." The atmosphere at Gate B12 shifted from annoyed impatience to electrified tension. The air felt heavy, charged with the static of 100 smartphones being raised simultaneously. The modern Colosseum wasn't made of stone. It was made of 4K video recording and live streams. Brock Henderson, realizing he had an audience, immediately switched tactics. He stepped back from the podium, holding his hands up in a mock defensive posture, as if Maya were physically threatening him. It was a performance he had perfected over years of petty tyrannies. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Brock shouted, his voice cracking with feigned panic. "You are violating federal safety zones. I feel threatened." Maya didn't move an inch. She stood perfectly still, her hands visible, her expression unreadable. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was building a narrative for the police report. Aggressive passenger, feared for safety, had to de-escalate. It was the standard playbook for incompetent authority figures trying to cover their tracks. Two uniformed Chicago Police Department officers, Miller and Davis, came jogging down the concourse, their radios chattering. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Officer Miller, the senior of the two, looked tired. He had dealt with 3 drunks and a lost child already that shift. A gate dispute was the last thing he wanted. All right, break it up," Miller said, stepping between Maya and the podium. "What's the problem here?" Brock jumped in before Maya could take a breath. "Officer, thank God, this woman is out of control. She presented a fraudulent passport, and when I confiscated it per protocol, she became belligerent. She lunged at me. I think she's intoxicated." The crowd murmured. Several people shouted, "Liar! And he ripped it!" Officer Miller looked at Maya. He saw a calm black woman in a trench coat, standing with a posture that was almost military in its discipline. She didn't look intoxicated. She looked dangerous, but not in the way Brock implied. "Ma'am?" Miller asked. "Is this true?" "Officer Miller," Maya said, reading his name tag. Her voice was low, controlled, and precise. "I am not intoxicated. I did not lunge at Mr. Henderson. I presented a valid U.S. diplomatic official passport for a standard identity check. Mr. Henderson accused me of forgery based on racial bias, refused to scan the document, and then deliberately destroyed federal property by ripping the identification page out of the booklet. That is a felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1590, and Section 1361. Brock laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Diplomatic? Please, look at her. She's flying economy, and she's quoting codes like she's watching Law and Order. She's crazy, officer. Just get her out of here so I can board my flight. We're already 10 minutes delayed." Miller looked at the counter. There, lying like a dead bird, was the mutilated passport. The photo page was hanging by a single thread. "Did you rip this, son?" Miller asked Brock. "It came apart," Brock insisted, sweating now. "It was a fake. The glue was cheap. I was just checking the integrity." "He ripped it on purpose," a young woman from the line shouted, holding up her phone. "I have it on video. He looked her in the eye and ripped it." Brock pointed a shaking finger at the passenger. "You, put that phone away. It's illegal to film airline staff." "Actually," Maya interjected, "Title 18 does not prohibit the filming of public events in a terminal, provided it does not interfere with screening procedures. They are documenting a crime scene." Officer Davis, the younger partner, picked up the passport. He examined it closely. He looked at the gold foil stamp on the cover, then at the torn page. His eyes went wide. He leaned in and whispered to Miller, "Sarge, this isn't a standard blue passport. It's maroon. This is an official government passport, issued to federal officers." Miller's face hardened. He looked at Brock, then at Maya. The dynamic in the circle changed instantly. The police have a sixth sense for authority, and Miller suddenly realized he might be standing next to someone who outranked everyone in the building. "Ma'am," Miller said, his tone shifting from dismissive to respectful. "Who exactly are you?" Maya reached into her inner coat pocket. Brock flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a leather wallet. She flipped it open. A gold badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Terminal 3. Below it was an ID card with the Department of Transportation seal. "I am Senior Special Agent and Regional Auditor Maya Sterling," she declared, her voice projecting so the entire gate could hear. "I report directly to the FAA Administrator and the Inspector General, and you, Mr. Henderson, have just detained a federal officer and destroyed government property during an active investigation." The silence that followed was absolute. Brock's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. I didn't know," Brock stammered. "I thought you were just what?" Maya stepped closer, the predator finally cornering the prey. "Just a black woman you could bully? Just a passenger you could power trip over because you were having a bad day?" "No, Officer Miller." Maya turned to the police. "I want to press charges, immediately, and I want the station manager, Linda Kravitz, down here, now." 20 minutes later, Brock Henderson sat in a folding chair in the airport police substation. He was no longer the king of Gate B12. He was a man watching his life disintegrate. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold the cup of water Officer Davis had given him. In the adjacent room, Maya sat at a conference table. She was on the phone. "Yes, sir. The Red Team operation is compromised, but the results are conclusive," she said into the receiver. "The culture of non-compliance at O'Hare is worse than we thought. It's not just procedural. It's malicious. I have a destroyed credential." On the other end of the line was the assistant administrator of the FAA in Washington, D.C. "They ripped your credentials? You're kidding." "I wish I were. I want a full hold on Aerolux's O'Hare operations, effective immediately. Ground the fleet for a localized audit." "That's going to cost them millions, Maya." "Then they should have hired better staff," Maya said coldly. "I'm initiating a Level 4 review." She hung up, just as the door flew open. Linda Kravitz, the Aerolux station manager, burst in. Linda was a woman in her 50s who looked like she survived on caffeine and panic. She was wearing a sharp navy suit, but her hair was disheveled. "Agent Sterling," Linda gasped, breathless. "I came as soon as I heard. I am so sorry. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Maya didn't stand up. She remained seated, her ruined passport lying on the table between them like a corpse. "Ms. Kravitz," Maya said, "it's not a misunderstanding. It's a felony." "Brock he's overzealous," Linda pleaded, wringing her hands. "He's been under a lot of stress. We can replace the passport. We can upgrade you to first class on the next flight. We can offer you vouchers." Maya laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Vouchers? Linda, do you realize what your employee did? He profiled me. He publicly humiliated me. And then he destroyed a document that belongs to the United States government. Do you think a voucher fixes that?" "We will fire him," Linda said quickly. "He's gone. Terminated. Right now." "That's a start," Maya said. "But that's not the end. You see, I wasn't just flying to London. I was conducting a specific audit on you." Linda went pale. "Me?" "You manage this station. You set the culture. I've read the complaints, Linda. The denied boardings of minorities. The refusal to follow ADA protocols. The rudeness. You ignored them all because your on-time departure numbers were good." Maya stood up and walked over to the whiteboard in the room. She picked up a marker. "Aerolux stock is trading at $45 a share right now," Maya said. "By tomorrow morning, when the press release about the FAA grounding your O'Hare fleet hits the wire, what do you think that number will be?" Linda looked ready to vomit. You're grounding us?" "I'm grounding every Aerolux bird that touches this tarmac until every single gate agent completes a 40-hour retraining course overseen by my office. And I'm levying a civil penalty for the interference with a federal auditor. The fine starts at $50,000 per violation. Considering Brock violated my civil rights, destroyed property, and falsified a security concern." Maya did a mock calculation in the air. "I'd say you're looking at about a $2.5 million fine. To start." The door to the interrogation room opened. Officer Miller stuck his head in. "Agent Sterling, we're ready to book him. Do you want to make a statement?" Maya looked at Linda. "Excuse me, Ms. Kravitz. I have to go watch your overzealous employee get handcuffed." The walk back through the terminal was a procession. Maya didn't want Brock whisked away out the back door. She insisted, citing witness identification protocols, that he be walked back through the terminal to the police vehicle waiting at the curb. They walked past gate B12. The flight to London had not departed. The passengers were still there, glued to the windows and the walkway. When Brock Henderson emerged, flanked by 2 officers, his hands cuffed behind his back, the terminal went silent, then erupted. It wasn't applause, it was the murmur of justice. The student whose backpack Brock had kicked was there. The elderly couple he had yelled at was there. They watched as the tyrant was marched out. Brock kept his head down, his face a mask of misery. He saw Maya standing by the podium, her arms crossed. He couldn't look her in the eye. As he passed, Maya stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson," she said. He stopped. The officers paused. "I hope it was worth it," she said. "I hope that 3 minutes of feeling powerful was worth your career, your pension, and your freedom." I was doing my job," Brock whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. "No," Maya corrected him. "You were doing your worst. And now, the system you thought you could weaponize is going to weaponize itself against you." As they led him away, a young teenager shouted, "Bye, Felicia!" and the tension broke. The crowd laughed, but Maya didn't laugh. She turned to the new gate agent who had been rushed in to replace Brock, a terrified-looking young woman named Sarah. "Sarah, is it?" Maya asked gently. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah squeaked. "Board the elderly couple first, then the family with the baby, then the rest. Do it by the book. Be kind. I'm watching." "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Maya watched as the boarding process began, smooth and respectful. It was amazing how efficient people could be when they knew consequences were real. The next morning, the headline on CNN wasn't about the passport. It was about the stock market. Aerolux shares plummet, 18% following FAA crackdown at O'Hare. In the boardroom of Aerolux HQ in Dallas, CEO Marcus Thorne threw his iPad across the polished mahogany table. It shattered against the wall. "Who is Maya Sterling?" Thorne roared. "And why is she dismantling my Midwest hub?" The general counsel, a man named Peterson, cleared his throat nervously. "She's the Grim Reaper of the FAA, sir. She's the one who took down Sky High Airways in 2019. She doesn't take bribes, she doesn't take threats, and she apparently flies economy to catch our staff acting like animals." "Fix it," Thorne demanded. "Call her. Offer a settlement." "We tried, sir." She refused to take the call. She sent a subpoena instead. She wants our internal HR logs for the last 5 years regarding discrimination complaints. Thorne sank into his chair. If she gets those logs, sir, the class action lawsuit will be larger than the FAA fine." Back in Chicago, Maya was sitting in a temporary office the airport authority had provided for her. She was surrounded by boxes of files. The video of Brock ripping her passport had gone viral. It had 15 million views on TikTok. The hashtag #MaurPassportKaren, though Brock was a man, the moniker stuck, was trending #1 globally. Maya wasn't looking at the video. She was looking at Brock's personnel file, which she had seized. It was a gold mine of negligence. 3 prior complaints of racial profiling, 2 complaints of physical aggression, and next to each one, a stamp from Linda Kravitz. Unfounded. Employee counseled. They had protected him. They had enabled him. Maya picked up the phone and dialed her team in D.C. "Expand the scope," she said. "I want Linda Kravitz's emails. I want the regional VP's emails. We aren't just fining them for the passport. We're going after them for systemic violation of civil rights under the Air Carrier Access Act." "Maya, that's war," her deputy said. "They declared war when they tore up my identity," Maya replied. "I'm just finishing it." The United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois looked less like a hall of justice and more like a red carpet premiere. News vans from CNN, Fox, and MSNBC lined South Dearborn Street, their satellite dishes aimed at the overcast Chicago sky like supplicant hands. The hashtag #NotAPassportRipper was trending globally for the 3rd month in a row, fueled by leaked security footage and the sheer audacity of the crime. Brock Henderson arrived in a tinted SUV, not provided by the airline, but by his bail bondsman. He stepped onto the sidewalk and was immediately blinded by flashbulbs. He wore a navy suit that was slightly too large. He had lost 15 pounds since the arrest due to stress-induced nausea. He kept his head down, ignoring the shouts of, "Why did you do it?" and "How does it feel to be famous?" Inside courtroom 14, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air conditioning was humming, but the tension made the air thick and hot. Maya Sterling was already seated at the prosecution table. She looked impeccable. She wore a cream-colored suit, her hair pulled back in a sharp, professional chignon. She wasn't looking at her phone or chatting with her lawyers. She was sitting in absolute stillness, her hands folded on top of a thick binder, labeled Evidence. Aerolux Henderson. The trial began with a desperate gambit. Brock's defense attorney was Arthur Vance, a man known for defending white-collar criminals and politicians. He had been paid a retainer by Aerolux initially, though that funding had mysteriously dried up weeks ago. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Vance boomed, pacing the floor, "we are here because of a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding weaponized by a federal agent looking for a headline. Brock Henderson is not a villain. He is an overworked, underpaid frontline worker who was tasked with the impossible job of keeping our skies safe. He made a mistake with a passport that looked damaged. But ask yourselves, did Agent Sterling de-escalate? No, she pushed him. She taunted him. She practically begged him to rip that document so she could destroy his life. Brock sat up straighter. It sounded good. It sounded like he was the victim. He glanced at the jury. 12 ordinary citizens. A few of them looked sympathetic. Maybe he would walk. Maybe he would get a slap on the wrist. Then, the assistant U.S. attorney, a woman named Elena Ross, with eyes like flint, stood up. She didn't pace. She didn't boom. She simply walked over to the large monitor facing the jury. "The defense wants you to believe this was a mistake," Ross said calmly. "We are going to show you it was a sport." She played a video. It wasn't the viral video from the bystander's phone. This was new footage. It was grainy, taken from a tiny camera lens hidden in a button on Maya Sterling's coat. The audio was crystal clear. "Scan the passport, Mr. Henderson. I don't need a machine to tell me what my eyes see. I am warning you. You're a passenger in my line." The sound of the rip tore through the silent courtroom, a sharp, violent noise amplified by the high-end speakers. "That sound," Ross said, pausing for effect, "is the sound of a federal officer's identity being violated. But Mr. Henderson didn't stop there. He called the police. He filed a false report. He tried to have a federal agent arrested to cover his own temper tantrum." The turning point of the trial wasn't the video, though. It was the betrayal. Brock had been counting on Linda Kravitz, his station manager, to back him up. Linda had told him in the break room 1,000 times, "I got your back, Brock. We stick together." When the prosecution called Linda Kravitz to the stand, she didn't look at Brock. She looked at the floor. She had been granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for her testimony against the airline's broader practices. "Ms. Kravitz," Ross asked, "did Mr. Henderson act according to Aerolux training?" Brock held his breath. "Say yes, Linda. Say I was following protocol." Linda took a sip of water. Her hands were shaking. "No," she whispered. "Mr. Henderson he was a problem. We had multiple meetings about his aggression." Brock's jaw dropped. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You liar! You told me to do it! You sent the email about clearing the queue!" "Objection!" Vance shouted, trying to pull Brock down. "Sit down, Mr. Henderson," Judge Holloway barked. "She told me to deny people," Brock screamed, his face turning purple. "She gave me a bonus for every no-show I logged. Don't you lie on me, Linda." The jury stared, horrified. Brock's outburst had just confirmed everything the prosecution claimed. He wasn't a stressed worker. He was a loose cannon. Linda Kravitz had thrown him to the wolves to save her own pension, and in doing so, she had sealed his fate. The final nail in the coffin came when Maya took the stand. She didn't testify with emotion, she testified with data. During the seizure of Mr. Henderson's work terminal, Maya explained, her voice cool and authoritative, my team recovered a digital file named Trophies XLSX. The screen behind her changed. It was a spreadsheet. The courtroom gasped. It was a log. Date, Oka Taosi 4. Target, Asian male student. Reason, bag too big. Result, $75 fee. Comment, easy money. Date, Oct 12. Target, elderly couple. Reason, confusion. Result, denied boarding. Comment, don't clog my line. Date, Nov. 1. Target, single mother. Reason, stroller issue. Result, missed flight. Comment, she cried. LOL. He kept score, Maya said, looking directly at Brock. He wasn't protecting the skies. He was hunting the vulnerable. Brock sank into his chair. He felt naked. The trophy list was his private joke. How did they find it? He realized then, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that Maya Sterling hadn't just audited the gate. She had audited his soul. The jury deliberated for exactly 45 minutes. It was insulting how fast it was. They didn't need lunch. They just needed to sign the paper. When the foreman stood up, Brock couldn't breathe. In the matter of the United States versus Brock Henderson, we find the defendant guilty on count 1, destruction of government property. Guilty on count 2, interference with a federal investigation. Guilty on count 3, deprivation of civil rights. And then, the kicker. The assault charges from the other victims who had come forward after the video went viral. Guilty on count 4, simple assault. Judge Holloway removed her glasses. She looked at Brock with an expression of utter disdain. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "in my 20 years on the bench, I have seen bank robbers with more honor than you. You bullied people because you could. You derived pleasure from the pain of others. You are a small man who cast a long shadow only because you stood on a podium." She slammed the gavel. "I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed under the guidelines. 36 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution of $150,000 to the victims identified in your trophy list, and you are hereby banned for life from employment in the aviation or transportation security sectors. 3 years. Brock felt the bailiff's hands on his wrists. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut. This time there was no one to call, no Linda, no union rep, just the cold reality of a cage. But the karma didn't stop with Brock. Maya Sterling had aimed her weapon at the beast, not just the tooth. As Brock was being led out the back door of the courtroom to a waiting transport van, the stock market in New York was reacting to the verdict. Maya had timed the release of her full Red Team report to coincide with the guilty verdict. The report was titled Systemic Failure, the Profit Over People Culture of Aerolux Airways. It detailed everything. The emails from the CEO, Marcus Thorne, pressuring managers to cut corners, the bonuses for denied boardings, the deliberate understaffing of customer service desks to force people to buy new tickets instead of rebooking. On Wall Street, the ticker for Aerolux, ALX, turned red. Then it turned deep crimson. 10:00 a.m. ALX, 45 hours Osasha, 10.15 a.m. ALX, 3250, 10:00 a.m. ALX, 18. Panic swept the Aerolux headquarters in Dallas. CEO Marcus Thorne was in the middle of a catered lunch when his phone exploded with notifications. He turned on the TV in his office just in time to see a live feed from the Department of Transportation. The Secretary of Transportation was standing at a podium. In light of the revelations from the Henderson trial and the subsequent FAA audit conducted by Agent Sterling, the Secretary announced, the department is levying a record civil penalty against Aerolux Airways in the amount of $25 million. Marcus dropped his fork. Furthermore, the Secretary continued, we are placing the airline's operating certificate under probationary review. If substantial leadership changes are not made within 24 hours, we will suspend their license to fly domestic routes. It was a death sentence. The boardroom execution. 20 minutes later, security guards entered Marcus Thorne's office. They weren't smiling. Mr. Thorne, the head of security said, the board has convened an emergency session. You are terminated for cause, effective immediately. You can't do this, Marcus sputtered, standing up. I built this company. You destroyed it, the guard said. Hand over your badge and your phone. Escort him out. Marcus was marched through the lobby of the building he used to rule. Employees, the ones whose pensions had just taken a hit because of the stock crash, watched him go. No one held the door for him. Linda's fate. Linda Kravitz, despite her immunity deal, didn't escape the karma. While she couldn't be prosecuted for the specific crimes of that day, the immunity didn't cover civil liability. A class action lawsuit, led by the passengers on Brock's trophy list, named her personally for negligent supervision and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She lost her house, she lost her boat, she lost her reputation. The last anyone heard of her, she was working the night shift at a toll booth on the turnpike, handing change to drivers who didn't even look at her face, a ghostly echo of the gate agent she used to manage. Back in Chicago, the transport van rattled over the potholes. Brock Henderson sat in the cage in the back, chained to the floor. He was alone. He looked out the small, wire mesh window. He saw a plane taking off in the distance, climbing into the clouds. It was a silver bird, free and powerful. He looked down at his hands. They were rough. He wasn't holding a scanner anymore. He wasn't holding a passport. He was holding nothing. He thought about Maya Sterling. He thought about how quiet she had been. He had mistaken her silence for weakness. He realized now that it wasn't weakness. It was the calm of a hurricane before it makes landfall. He leaned his head against the cold metal wall of the van and closed his eyes. the sound of the ripping passport playing on a loop in his mind, the soundtrack to the rest of his life. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was a fortress of stone and glass, a fitting setting for the end of Brock Henderson's reign of terror. It had been 6 months since he ripped Maya Sterling's passport in half at Gate B12, but the echoes of that sound were about to bring down an empire. Brock sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the strutting peacock he had been at the airport. His cheap suit hung loosely on his frame, his face was pale, and his hands were clasped tightly together to hide their shaking. Across the aisle, Maya Sterling sat in the front row. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She was looking at him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. Brock's lawyer, a high-priced shark named Elias Thorne, paid for by Aerolux, had started the trial with a bold strategy: victim blaming. Maya Sterling is a professional provocateur, Thorne had argued, pacing before the jury. She is a red team auditor. Her entire job is to trick hard-working employees. She baited Mr. Henderson. She pushed him until he snapped. This wasn't a crime. It was entrapment. For a moment, it seemed like it might work. Brock felt a flicker of hope. But then the prosecution called their star witness, Sarah Jenkins, the young gate agent who had stood silently beside Brock that day. Sarah took the stand, trembling. She refused to make eye contact with Brock. "Ms. Jenkins," the prosecutor asked, "was the incident with Ms. Sterling an isolated event?" "No," Sarah whispered. "Speak up, please." "No," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "Brock, Mr. Henderson, kept a scoreboard. He called it the cull. He would brag about how many people he could deny boarding to. He specifically targeted people who he thought wouldn't fight back. The elderly, non-English speakers, minorities." A murmur went through the courtroom. Brock's lawyer closed his eyes. "Did he say anything before Ms. Sterling approached the desk?" Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. "Yes. He saw her standing in the queue. He turned to me and said, 'Watch this. I'm going to teach this one a lesson about who runs this terminal.'" The courtroom erupted. The entrapment defense evaporated instantly. Brock wasn't a victim of a stressful job. He was a predator who had finally hunted the wrong tiger. But Maya Sterling wasn't done. She wasn't just after the foot soldier. She was after the generals. During the sentencing phase, Maya's legal team introduced Exhibit G, the internal email logs of Aerolux Airways. Linda Kravitz, the station manager who had tried to buy Maya off with vouchers, was called to testify. She sat in the witness box, looking like she had aged 10 years in 6 months. "Ms. Kravitz," Maya's lawyer said, projecting an email onto the large courtroom screens. "Can you explain this email from you to Mr. Henderson, dated 2 weeks prior to the incident?" The text on the screen was damning. Subject: efficiency numbers. Body: "Brock, your denial numbers are great. Keep clearing out the overbooked flights. If they argue, claim security protocols. I'll back you up. Just get the plane out on time." I was speaking about standard procedure," Linda stammered. "You were authorizing your staff to falsify security threats to boost on-time departures," the lawyer corrected her. "You turned a safety regulation into a weapon for profit." The jury looked from Linda to Brock with pure disgust. The chain of command didn't excuse the soldier, but it certainly condemned the commander. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman stood up, the silence in the room was deafening. In the matter of the United States vs. Brock Henderson, we find the defendant guilty on all counts: destruction of government property, interference with a federal officer, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Judge Holloway, a stern woman who had zero patience for bullies, looked down at Brock over her spectacles. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "you treated your podium like a throne and passengers like peasants. You forgot that the authority you held was borrowed, not owned. You stripped a woman of her identity because you didn't like the way she looked. Today, the system strips you of your authority." Sentence: 30 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from working in the aviation industry. As the gavel banged, Brock put his head in his hands. He heard the click of handcuffs, a sound so much harsher than the tearing of a passport. As he was led away, he looked back at the gallery. His son, who had come to watch, stood up and walked out without looking back. The fallout was swift and brutal. 1. Aerolux Airways. The release of the emails caused the stock to tank. Shareholders sued the board. The CEO, Marcus Thorne, was ousted in a humiliating boardroom coup. The airline was fined a record $15 million by the Department of Transportation. 2. Linda Kravitz. She was fired for cause, losing her pension. She was last seen working as a telemarketer, a job where she had to be polite to people who hung up on her. 3. The Henderson Rule. The FAA implemented a new mandatory training protocol named after Brock. Every new gate agent in America now had to watch a video case study of Brock's failure. He had become famous, just like he wanted, but as a warning, not a hero. Redemption in the dirt. 2 years later, the Greyhound bus station in Cleveland, Ohio, was a far cry from the polished floors of O'Hare. It smelled of diesel, wet coats, and stale coffee. Brock Henderson was there, but he wasn't checking tickets. He was pushing a mop bucket. Prison had been hard. It had stripped away his muscles, his arrogance, and his ego. He was thinner now, his hair graying at the temples. He kept his head down. He did his job. He went home to a small studio apartment. It was 2:00 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The station was mostly empty, except for a young mother arguing with the night shift ticket agent, a kid named Kyle, who had the exact same sneer Brock used to have. "I'm telling you, the bus left!" Kyle shouted. "You buy a new ticket, or you wait until morning." "I don't have money for a new ticket," the woman pleaded, holding a crying baby. "My connection was late. It wasn't my fault. Not my problem," Kyle scoffed. "Step aside." Brock stopped mopping. He watched the scene unfold. It was like looking into a mirror of his past. The power trip, the lack of empathy, the cruelty disguised as policy. Brock leaned his mop against the wall. He wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and walked over to the counter. "Kyle," Brock said, his voice raspy. "What do you want, janitor?" Kyle snapped. "Go clean the bathroom." "Check the system for code 44, Brock said calmly. "What? Code 44, Brock repeated. "Involuntary missed connection due to carrier delay. It allows you to print a compassionate pass for the next bus at no charge." Kyle glared at him. "I don't know how to do that." "Hit F5, then Control R, Brock said. He knew the system because he had read the manual during his lunch breaks. It was the only connection he had left to his old life, knowing the rules. But this time, he was using the rules to help, not to hurt. Kyle hesitated, intimidated by the quiet intensity in Brock's eyes. He typed the command. The printer whirred. A ticket slid out. Brock picked up the ticket and handed it to the woman. "Here, ma'am," Brock said gently. "The bus leaves from Bay 4 in 20 minutes. There's a vending machine around the corner if you need water for the baby." The woman looked at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're an angel." Brock managed a weak, sad smile. "No, ma'am. I'm just the janitor." He watched her run to catch her bus. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on his chest lightened. He hadn't regained his career. He hadn't regained his status. But as he picked up his mop and went back to cleaning the dirty floors of a bus station, Brock Henderson finally regained his humanity. And that is the story of how the passport ripper learned the hardest lesson of all. Maya Sterling didn't just win a court case. She forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. Brock Henderson thought power was about making people feel small, but in the end, he realized that true strength comes from lifting people up, even if you're just holding a mop. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about being forced to start over from the bottom to understand what it feels like to be stepped on. If you enjoyed this saga of arrogance meeting hard karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel and tells YouTube you want more stories like this. Subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a video. Have you ever seen a worker abuse their power and get caught? Tell me your story in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Be kind to each other, and I'll catch you in the next one.